Welcome to episode 5.
Are we there already?
We are on episode 5 of season 4.
Season 4.
My name is Matt Davies, marketing and community manager / owner of a giant tentacled monster on my left arm, with my tentacled partner.
Oh, come on! I need. This is strange.
How about my deep? No, deep one sounds a bit worse.
If you...
The king in blue. There you go. You're wearing blue today, so you can be the king in blue.
If you and I were ever to do, like, maybe I was the wrestler,
yeah,
and you were the ring announcer,
yeah,
or boxer, whatever, you were introducing me down to the ring.
You wouldn't come out.
Not to that. Not to that introduction, no. Yes, my name is Matthew Walker, the audio guy behind what you're currently hearing.
Well, thank you for joining me today, Matt. We have had a rip-roaring time over these last few episodes.
It's been insane.
We've covered quite a diverse range of topics.
Yeah.
And today we're going to be going into a topic that's quite close to my heart. Or it's a story that I love, a genre that I'm very interested in, and to Tomas Rawlings, who will be joining us a little bit later on, which is Cthulhu. We'll discuss the pronunciations a bit later. But yeah, I also should probably say this is also #sadface, because this will be my last episode.
Is this it? No.
This is it.
I've been dreading this moment.
This is season 4, episode 5. This will be my last one to be going on with. So, see, now you could probably put in a history of me saying, right. That's all I've done. No, don't do that. That'd be awful.
I thought you were going to say I can put in some sympathetic, emotional violin.
Just
to really
yeah. As
turn
long as
that dial
it's
up.
not a ukulele. Follow us on Twitter, and you'll see.
You wait.
You'll see the war that's going on currently between the two of us online. But yeah, no. Unfortunately, this is my sad departure from Auroch Digital. So, by the time this comes out, we'll have a new marketing and community person in position, and I am fully confident that they will no doubt be incredible, wonderful, even better than I could ever hope to aspire to. And I'm very excited to see all the stuff that comes out. But yeah, I'm gonna be moseying off. So I'm gonna be going off to work in the government. That's what I'm going to be doing.
Which is almost as fun as working.
Yes, it is.
Digital.
I should
almost
as exciting. No, I'm really excited about the challenge. I'm really looking forward to it. But I just thought I'd take this opportunity to say a big thank you to everyone who listens. Big thank you for everyone who's been picking up these episodes. Joining us on our journey. When we started. It's a year ago now that we've had this, and we're already up to season 4. And looking down to season 5. But I am very confident that Auroch Digital is going in the right direction. I fully believe that company's going to go from strength to strength.
Is that why we're offering you? We've got rid of the dead weight. Now we can go in the right direction.
It's finally been able to.
You've been nothing but holding this up for a year, Matt. God.
So, and we thought, for my final episode, we talk about something that I particularly like, which is, Cthulhu. So why not? So, we'll probably talk a little bit more in the end of the episode. But let's get a more positive note, shall we? Let us get into a more positive vibe, and let's get into the potted history of Cthulhu games. So we are now going to dive into our last couple of episodes we did a sort of potted history of seems to go down very well. People seem to enjoy those. So we thought we'd talk about a subject that's very close to myself and Tomas Rawlings' heart. And thank you again, Tom, for joining us right now.
It's very close to your left arm as well.
Very close to my left arm. In fact, it takes up a large portion of my left arm, which is a potted history of Cthulhu games.
Should you post a picture in the show notes of your left arm?
I think I will. Actually, do you know what? I'm going to post the picture I did for Acts on Cthulhu Tactics, which was me in my Cthulhu t-shirt with my Cthulhu tattoo.
Were you showing the full text? Oh, right. Yeah, there's a lot of Cthulhu.
That's breaking the fourth wall there.
There's a lot of Cthulhu in there. I do have 2 big tentacles next to my desk at home
right.
as well.
Okay. I wondered what you were going to say then.
2 tentacles for legs.
This is a family podcast.
But we are going to talk just a little bit more about Cthulhu, just Cthulhu in general. So for those of you who maybe are less aware, what is Cthulhu? Where does the story come from? What's that? And is that the correct pronunciation? Is the first debate everybody has.
Yes. Well, Lovecraft intended the word to be difficult to pronounce, and that's why it's spelt. So arguably, there's no such thing as a correct pronunciation. So Cthulhu, however you want to say it, no one can say you're wrong. But I think Cthulhu has become the kind of most commonly used version. When we did the Act on Cthulhu Tactics podcast, we covered a lot more about who Cthulhu is and what that is. I mean, I'll rush through it briefly now, but I think if people want more detail, I think we go into a lot more detail there. So super quick introduction. What we now call the Cthulhu mythos was predominantly created by a writer called H.P. Lovecraft, predominantly working around the turn of the last century, sort of 1910 into the 1930s. And he created a series of stories that he ended up interlinking with a series of creatures, the most famous of which now, but not necessarily then, is the Call of Cthulhu. And then, because they had this idea, lots of the other authors in that circle would riff off each other. They would play, they were kind of like in jokes. They'd use each other's monsters. They'd use spell books and characters off each other. So you find that the kind of what happened in effect, they created like an open source horror community. And then,
it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. So as they bothered, so other famous ones are. The King in Yellow is like Lovecraft was a fan of The King in Yellow, which is a stories written by Robert Chambers, but he himself borrowed some of the concepts from there, like Carcosa from Ambrose Bierce. Other people within Lovecraft's circle included like Robert E. Howard, who's famous for Conan.
Thank you, a model of mine. I've tried to aspire to in my life.
He also wrote a series, another barbarian called Bran Mac Morn, who's like a Pictish barbarian.
Okay.
And then, there's a whole bunch of other authors in there, but I guess the other one that's often noted is Robert Bloch, who was famous for writing Psycho. And they all kind of, like I say, they riffed off each other. They wrote stories. They kind of played around. And so over time, this large body of work. And then I guess after Lovecraft died, he wasn't that famous. He wasn't hugely known.
Yeah. Is Da Vinci? I've heard it. Is it Da Vinci that he wasn't famous in his lifetime, or no? Chopped his ear off.
Oh, Van Gogh.
Van Gogh, yeah, he didn't really have as much.
Just interestingly, he was only part of it, not his whole ear.
There you go.
I played him in a musical once.
There we go. But again, he wasn't as effective in his own life, and then when he died, then his work became more prevalent and more interesting.
And a guy called Augustus Derleth, who was a massive fan of Lovecraft and was very good at writing pastiches of his, and in fact, he did loads of Arthur Conan Doyle. He wrote a series of pastiches called The Adventures of Solar Ponds, which was his Sherlock Holmes pastiche. He's both like revered and reviled by a lot of Lovecraftian fans because he both is largely responsible for preserving Lovecraft's work and popularizing it, but also he inserted himself into Lovecraft's canon, wrote his own stuff, and often like gave himself equal or billing with Lovecraft in things that weren't really Lovecraft's work. So it's kind of mixed, but I think that whole open source thing over time, because of its time, a lot of the authors around there were a little bit racist, a little bit sexist.
This is an important thing to strike on, because I think this is one of the things that a lot of people I speak to about H.P. Lovecraft and about the stories of Cthulhu don't know about that time and about him as an author, and then how that translates to how the mythos is developed now. Like, to not put too fine a point on it, I mean, Lovecraft was a bit of a racist and a bit of a sexist, and
he was an anti-Semite. Yeah. He was a xenophobe. And
a lot of the writers were as well.
Yeah, I was listening to another podcast where they were talking about like the Mountains of Madness, the film that never got made, and one of the presenters on that podcast said, Lovecraft is a bit of a dick, but we've got to separate out the artist from the person,
the art from the art.
Yeah, the art. Sorry, from the person, and I think where that's been done most interestingly is recently you've had loads of people riffing off Lovecraft's work and the mythos and the kind of wider mythos, but reinventing it in really interesting ways that take on those issues. So I guess I would note there's a really good book called The Ballad of Black Tom by Victor Lavelle, and he revisited a Lovecraft story called The Horror at Red Hook, which is a very racist story, but he tells it from the point of view of a black man living in New York at that time, experiencing that. So it's a great novel. There's another one that I'm a big fan of called The Dream Quest of Villette Beau, and that's an author called Kiki Johnson, and she took Lovecraft's The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadith, which basically is almost devoid of female characters, and set it from the point of view of a female character. And it's a great story. Really highly recommend it. And so I think that's where it's been interesting stuff's been going as people take it on. So I think you can't ignore it, but at the same time, you can't allow it to define it, because so many other people have added to the mythos, and it is effectively out of copyright, so it is open source.
I mean, that's the love of it that I have, is that it's been so sort of like, it's been so like reused and repurposed and retaken in really interesting and new directions, that it's almost like the gestation of the idea is all that's been needed to spark all this creativity and these ideas, like, you know, like. And we're going to come on to the games and stuff that have inspired out of it. But like, you really do get that sense that it's now a community that is driving this forward, not the person. Lovecraft almost is just the person that wrote it. And then we shouldn't be being, I mean, it's great that he came up with the idea, but that's about where it ends. His life, his views, his politics, his everything else all becomes secondary to this great idea that has now birthed into everything else that we're able to use and love and enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the interesting thing with it, is you can take a piece of this Cthulhu-y clay, this protoplasm, and shape it into the thing you want it to be. You're not defined by the past. You're not defined by it was. And that's why it's still so vibrant. I think if it didn't have that, we'd be talking about somebody else.
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
would not be what we'd be discussing.
So let's then move on to a topic that's a little closer to our hearts. Let's talk about Cthulhu in video games, because obviously there's, again, like we did when we did the history of car combat, we could go down a pathway of TV shows and videos and blah, 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 and all this stuff. But we'd like to try and refine ourselves. We only have a short amount of your time to be able to get this across. So video games, let's talk about where it is. And obviously we're not going to go through every single one, because there are so many.
We'd be here all day. And it would just be a massive list of games. I mean, just before we dive into video games, I think we kind of, to get a sense of the chronology of it, we do need to start briefly with the original game that came out of Lovecraft's work, which is the role-playing game Call of Cthulhu, which was written by Sandy Peterson, published by Chaosium back in 1981. And that is the kind of, for a lot of people, that's how they got into it. And that's, I think, a seminal work of gaming that has influenced then the video game side.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I kind of want to touch on that first. In doing sort of research for this, I found a really great, actually White Dwarf did a review of it in 1982, which White Dwarf back in the day was not entirely Games Workshop stuff. They used to cover everything. They used to, because it was predominantly a shop selling, Dungeons and Dragons. And they didn't have many of their own products.
I never realised
in the
they
early
used
days.
to cover stuff. Interesting, yeah.
So they did a review of it, a guy called Ian Bailey. He gave it a 9 out of 10 and saying, Call of Cthulhu is an excellent game and a welcome addition to the world of role-playing. So that's pretty cool. And one other sort I want to touch on that is that by the time they got to 4th edition, so this is 1990, a guy called Jim Bambra, he reviewed it in White Dwarf then, saying 4th edition contains enough adventures to keep any group happily entertained and sanity blasted. I mentioned that because Jim Bambra was my boss when I worked at a company called Pivotal Games.
Okay.
So it all looped around. In fact, he was into Lovecraft as well.
Oh, awesome.
And I think
he wasn't your inspiration for getting into it. Was it you? Had that before,
no, I came around it before, but I think we need to mention Sandy Peterson's work. That kind of has to be firmly in mind before we kind of jump back into, and it'll see as we come. So, arguably the first Lovecraftian game is a game Alone in the Dark, and that's 92. If you look at the cover of it, it really looks like the cover of the original Call of Cthulhu role-playing game.
Yeah.
And in fact, it says on the box, it says a virtual adventure game inspired by the work of H.P. Lovecraft. So it's kind of very obvious. But I think it's also notable, Alone in the Dark, that arguably it's the first 3D survival horror game. So a lot of those elements like Resident Evil and things like that have really taken on. The influence is there. So as well as being influenced by Lovecraft, that game then itself influenced gaming. So it's quite a seminal game in that sense. Then jumping forward a little bit, and again, I'm not going to go through everything. I'm just picking out the things that leap out at me, really. Shadow of the Comet, which was 1993.
See, I've never heard of any of these ones. Shadow of the Comet, Doyle Witch Horror, and Shadow over Innsmouth.
Well, Shadow of the Comet is based on is roughly the Dunwich Horror and the Shadow over Innsmouth Lovecraft stories that have been sort of turned into that.
Using the same format.
Yeah, roughly the story elements. But it's basically a kind of very old school point and click adventure. Okay. So 2D, there's a character on the screen who moves around. You click on different things. The character goes over. It's, kind of assemble things. It's dialogue. They did a follow-up, Prisoner of Ice, which is loosely based on Lovecraft's At the Mountains of Madness.
Yep.
And then you get into a different genre now.
Foghorn ready.
Yeah.
I see it.
XCOM, Terror from the Deep. That's 1995. And we covered these in our deep dive into history of turn-based strategy games. But really, it's the kind of deep ones, Lovecraft deep ones that are kind of in there. And I think, again, it's interesting because, we're looking at roughly about 5-year period over which we've covered in this, and it's covered 3 quite different genres that have been done. And then the one that I actually I played this at the time, but I didn't clock it all.
Yeah, I was going to say, this has been a new one. Yeah, Quake. That's not something I would have thought had been connected.
You can't record reactions in podcasts, but I just saw that and I'm like, whoa.
There's look at that forehead, creased in incredulity over there.
Yeah, so Quake of the title is actually the code name for Shub-Niggurath, which is one of Lovecraft's sort of monsters. And it's basically the final boss, known as the Hellmother, the All-Mother, the Witch Goddess. And so it's all the creatures in Quake essentially answer to this boss. So Quake is, at its heart, a Lovecraftian adventure, even though Lovecraft stuff tended not to have shotguns.
Yeah.
In fact, there's not a lot of fighting in Lovecraft stuff, which is why
it's a lot of running away.
Yeah, if you read Robert E. Howard's Lovecraftian stuff, like especially the ones with Conan, like Conan tends to solve his problems with the sword.
Yeah,
very very much that, as you do in Quake, you solve it with violence, whereas Lovecraft's characters tend to just go a bit bonkers and die.
The next one on the list, I don't know if you know, but apart from 2 others that will appear soon enough, is my favourite of the Cthulhu games.
I did not know this.
I absolutely love Call of Cthulhu: Dark Corners of the Earth. It came out I've got it on the Xbox, the original Xbox. I've still got the box for it somewhere. I absolutely loved that game to death. I thought it was when I remember being at university, tells you how old I am, but I remember picking the game up and playing it on my Xbox, and I remember playing it in a darkened room, with the lights out. And for those who haven't played it, it's a very psychological game. It's a very deep game that really, really takes you into that world, because you play a detective who goes off and has to investigate this mansion, and then it turns out you were being waited for this whole time, and then you go mad, and then you wake up and you have to go back to the town to work out what's gone on. And the mechanics in it are just like things will happen in the game that are a little bit weird. Like you'll see something that shouldn't be there, and the camera starts fuzzing around the outside, and you start not being able to see things properly. And then you also you only have 6 bullets in the game. So when you see a monster and a creature, you're like, do I fire? But if I fire, everyone will know where I am. So do I do that, or do I just hide and
Sounds
just ignore
very
it?
Alien Isolation.
It very proto that.
Yeah,
but it's yeah.
Well, I think it's notable because I think I first came across it. I was actually at E3, so it was one of the first time I think I ever went to E3, the big games event, and they were doing press demos there. And,
right.
and obviously, as a Lovecraftian fan at the time, I kind of snuck in to have a go on this game. And they were giving away copies of the rule book to people. So they gave me, and I think I didn't have a press badge, but I was in there and they gave me that. I was like, brilliant, this is great. I got to play this game. And they've given me a copy of the Call of Cthulhu rule book, which I already had. So
Amazing.
I had a spare copy then.
But how to infiltrate E3 by Auroch Digital.
But I think it's notable in that, and maybe this is a subject for another podcast, games that have grown. When it came out, it wasn't that well. It bombed commercially.
Yeah.
It wasn't that well received.
But over time, as well. I made it sound like it was like a 10 out of 10 game that everyone loved.
But over time, it's really grown in reputation, and I think deservedly so. I agree with you. I think it's a really good game, and I think it's
the suspense in it is
I think it's very it's fair that it's been reappraised. So again, doing research for this, I noticed that PC Gamer put it as 87 on their list of best PC games of all time in 2011.
Yeah.
So that's notable that was, so 6 years after it came out, they're kind of starting to recognise it. And I think that will just kind of grow. So yeah, great game.
Yep.
A few others I want to mention. Sherlock Holmes The Awakened, which is by Frogwares. I only want to mention that. They're lovely people, Frogwares. And they are currently doing The Sinking City, which I think will be published by Big Ben.
Which looks very cool.
Yeah, which looks very cool.
Very,
so
very cool.
Definitely got my eye on that.
Mm-hmm.
2010, Cthulhu Saves the World. A really different take.
Yeah,
You're now
yeah.
Cthulhu. If you've not played it, it's kind of like a JRPG.
Okay.
The script is very funny.
It's hilarious.
Have you played it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Cthulhu lost a lot of its horror in a way over the years because people do everything Cthulhu plushies.
Yeah.
There's
It
definitely
all
that,
became a
but
bit
it's very
cutesy,
cute.
didn't it?
Yeah. And then 2012, a game came out called Call of Cthulhu: The Wasted Land, and that was my first
I was going to say
overtly Cthulhu game
Yeah.
that I'd worked on. This is a game I've been wanting to make for ages. So we used a World War I setting, and I loosely used some of Herbert West Reanimator as part of it, as well as Call of Cthulhu within there, and mashed a bunch of stuff up. Very, very proud of that game. You know, I won a couple of awards for it, and still super proud of that. And then 2013, I mentioned Chainsaw Warrior.
I was going to say, this is interesting in terms of the lore.
I don't pick all these things, but I mention it just because that's a game we did. And I didn't see it as a Lovecraftian game, but when I did an interview after doing Chainsaw Warrior, so in 2013, the original is 1989, the board game. I did an interview with Stephen Han, the designer, and he mentioned that actually Lovecraftian stuff was one of a variety of influences that went into it. So the Chaos Cultists in there, he said, kind of came to him from Lovecraftian stuff. And you can find out
a little bit more about that in our Chainsaw Warrior episode as well. If you want to go back and have a listen to that, but more of that, we'll talk about that now.
Then there's a game called The Last Door. Last Door is another point and click, so we've gone back into a genre, but it's pixel art, and I'd recommend people check it out because they're actually really effective at doing horror in pixel art, because the two doesn't sound like it should work, but it actually works very well. And in fact, I backed another game they're doing on Kickstarter, which is, I'm not sure how Lovecraftian it is, but it's like a kind of 2D Dark Souls combat game called Blasphemous.
Yes, yeah. Really Super Metal one.
Yeah.
We were talking about this,
yeah. So, looking forward to that. 2016 Darkest Dungeon,
which I think a lot of people would have heard of.
Darkest Dungeon is a great game. Big fan of it. Again, it's so Lovecraftian. Like the company that made it is Red Hook Studios. They've got like DLC called The Color of Madness, which is color out of space.
I think this really what it shows is this idea that again they're taking, and it comes back to that point I was making earlier, that we were taking an idea and taking it down a different pathway that you might not have thought about, and even though it might not be overtly, again, Chainsaw Warrior is a good example of this, it might not overtly be a Cthulhu game and it has to have the words Call of Cthulhu or Cthulhu does this. It's much more like, here is the inspiration. And we're taking it our direction, and we're going to, although they then did the Color of Madness DLC, which kind of offsets that a little bit.
They do, because it's like you're going into this ancestral home to try and find relics, and as the darkness of that drives you, all your characters slightly insane, and they go insane in different ways. I mean, it's as a sanity system, and it's interesting you mention it with Dark Corners of the Earth. They have the kind of idea of going insane. It's a common theme, and again, going back to Sandy Peterson's work on the original Call of Cthulhu with the sanity mechanic. Lots of Lovecraftian games riff off that sanity mechanic in different ways, which I think makes it really interesting. But I think, Darkest Dungeon for me, I think they've done one of the best interpretations of the psychological thing and how they make it gameplay of any game, really. I think it's a brilliant game. I'm a big fan. So 2018, I also want to mention Cultist Simulator by Weather Factory, which is a really unusual take on a card game. But it's a brilliant game. I think, like I said, back on Kickstarter, so we spotted its genius early on. But it's a great game, thoroughly recommend. And in fact, they are currently, I think they're going to be doing another Kickstarter for a game about a character who runs a library with strange books in, or something like that. It sounds really intriguing.
Very interesting. Yeah, very cool.
We should stick a link in the show notes to it. Same year, a bunch of Cthulhu games come out, 2018. So Act on Cthulhu Tactics, which we have 3 podcasts that cover in depth.
Go really in depth in that one.
But we should run through. So it's based on Modiphius's role-playing game and miniatures tactics games of the same name. And that's our kind of take on that. And in a way, lots of the ideas that I wanted to do with The Wasted Land kind of came back through in that. And in fact, one of the characters is the same as well. But very proud of that. I think it's a great game, and it's on... it's well worth checking out, so please do. And that's on PC, Xbox, Switch, and PlayStation. Also 2018 was Call of Cthulhu, the official video game, developed by Cyanide and published by Focus Home. I mentioned
a lot of attention around them as well.
Yeah, a lot of attention. It was a big game IP. I think what I found, again, Cyanide, they make one of my favourite games, which is Blood Bowl.
Oh, right. Okay,
made the digital version of Blood Bowl, which I'm a big fan of. So it's actually on my list to play. I have it, but I haven't actually...
I've still not got around to it. Like, I was really hyped when it first came out, and it's just been sitting there waiting for me to play. I've just not got around to doing it yet.
Normally when I get...
I'm playing too much of those stupid football games.
When I get Christmas, it's often my time when I get some time to just sit down and play, so hopefully do it then. And then, again, we've far from gone through anything, but I do want to mention Dark Future, which is our game from this year, 2019. And again, it's like, oh, come on, you're banging on about Cthulhu with everything, but there is a connection. It's very tangential, but I feel we have to mention it. And so within the novel Demon Download, there's a scene where one of the characters talks about all of the strange beings that are like, there's a big list of deities that are trying to do something to the world. They're trying to destroy the kind of causality and sanity in the normal world. And within this massive list of gods, and lots of them are real ones, like Quetzalcoatl. You've also got the Death Bird, Pan. Loki, Pluto. But within there as well is Nyarlathotep, which is one of Lovecraft's. The King in Yellow, which is the Robert Chambers and Ambrose Bierce one, and also Yog-Sothoth, which is another Cthulhu one, which is the kind of the crawling chaos. So I think again there's this kind of, and this sounds like I've not, Dark Future and Chains of War, I did not consciously say let's have games with Cthulhu in. They just happen to have it, and I think to me the reason I mention it is it's so pervasive now. It's such an interesting current. It runs through lots of geek culture, which is great.
Try reading one of my like marketing reports. It's full of it.
They're just like Sub-Nigger of Cthulhu.
Just like it sort of reels off on the end. It's just you have to have a candle every time you read one of them. So I mean, that's a rather broad overview of video games in general. I mean, just to ask you quickly, do you have a favorite in that list? Is there one that you're particularly like? I've already thrown my hat in the ring. I think Dark Corners of the Earth is, and I would recommend anyone who wants to go back that has already picked up Acton Cthulhu Tactics to go and have a look at Dark Corners, because I really think it gets the immersion really well. Yeah,
I mean, of our games, I'm super proud of Wasted Land and super proud of the work we did on Acton Cthulhu Tactics, and they're both overtly Cthulhu games. So other than our stuff, I think probably Darkest Dungeon is one I play the most of, should we say.
With everything considered, like what Cthulhu game would you love to play moving forward? Like something that hasn't been done, so like an interesting concept, a new setting.
Jet Set Cthulhu.
No, I mean,
on a Cthulhu like manager or something.
I think that's what's interesting about it is I don't know, because it's so, you could do so many interesting things with it. Somebody will come along and do something.
But what would you love though? Like right now?
Yeah, well, I don't say it because we want to make the thing. So I mean, I suppose I'm looking right now. I'm looking forward to Frogware's The Sinking City. I'm very much looking forward to that.
That's good.
So that would be the thing I'm looking forward to. Yeah.
If we want to just like kind of dive ourselves back into into some of the other things, what else is happening in the world of like Cthulhu gaming in general? Like, is there anything on the horizon? Is there anything that's like out now that we should be looking at, or things that have been in the past?
Well, if we go back to the physical games for a bit, so I mentioned the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game, which we should. Interestingly, Dungeons and Dragons, which is obviously the kind of the big daddy to all role-playing games, they released a supplement in the early days. I think it's called Deities and Demigods, but I'm not, off the top of my head I can't remember. But basically they had all the Cthulhu mythos in it. They had loads of Stormbringer, so bunch of it, but they didn't have the copyright for a load of the stuff in it.
Okay.
I'm not sure if Lovecraft was out of copyright then, but the other stuff certainly they had in it wasn't.
Right.
They didn't have the copyright, so they withdrew it from sale.
Right.
So it's actually really valuable if you get hold of. So it's got like, cool. It's got like it's got like Shoggoths and Cthulhu and that in a D&D setting. Yeah. I think there's another setting that came out of that kind of used the rule set of Call of Cthulhu, although I think they've also used other systems like the Gumshoe. One called Delta Green.
Oh, I love Delta Green.
Yeah, Delta Green's a great setting. So originally
like the X-Files.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of X-Files Cthulhu.
Yeah.
So it has this kind of
if
aliens.
you like those two things already and don't know about Delta Green,
I don't want to say exactly what the setting is because it will kind of spoil it. But if you like the X-Files and you like Call of Cthulhu, then this is the game for you. So I think it was first 1992. Where they kind of added in there was a Pagan Publishing used to do this fanzine, and they did a supplement they did an article in there that kind of outlined this a bit, and it was very popular. So by 1997 they'd done their own full source book of it, and they've done loads of stuff since. We've backed their last Kickstarter to do some stuff in that. The novels they've done of Delta Green by short stories, I think they're very, very good. So I'm a big fan of that. I like that a lot. Other ones I think well worth mentioning again, I would mention Mansions of Madness, which is Fantasy Flight. That was 2011. That's a classic board game.
Really
it's
good
great.
Board game.
Very, very good.
Really, really, really good.
Sandy Peterson returned a couple of years ago with Cthulhu Wars, which is a large area conflict, a sort of area control think like Risk with Cthulhu. That, although I'm underselling it because it's a much more complicated game than that, and it's a really good.
The minis in it are
they're
not
miniatures.
I say minis. And
they're
massive. Not. They're
massives.
Huge.
Yeah.
They're absolutely ginormous. And they're beautiful.
The creature design in it is absolutely fantastic, and it's a great game, well designed. It's brilliant. Very, very pleased. Very pleased when I got a copy of that to play. It's great.
Yeah.
Other ones, well, Conan, which we mentioned before. So Modiphius, who did the Acton Cthulhu that we mentioned, they also publish the Conan role-playing game, and recently they put out one called Unspeakable Cults, which is a guide to religion in the Conan world, which includes some of these Lovecraftian things, because, as I say, Robert E. Howard had that connection back to it. And obviously they've got their own role-playing game, the Acton Cthulhu, and they've got their own tactics game as well. They're both great. And again, their minis are fantastic. Their miniature design, which we use, are really good. And I guess then one I'd touch on finally, which again, it's a tangential thing, but Ogre, which we did the board game port of, they did Ogre Cthulhu.
Yeah, I did not realise Ogre Cthulhu was a thing until I came into this office. And then knowing Tom as I do now, I was like, well, I'm not surprised you won't. I'm not surprised this has been something that we've collected out from here. But give us a very quick. What is it? Just an Is it? What does it do? Does it change the game?
It's ogre meshed with Cthulhu, so it's like a mutated ogre. Ogres are the giant cybernetic tanks.
Yeah,
and then there's a kind of Cthulhu tank. So it's a tank with this strange Cthulhu-like eye and these weird like crab-like tentacles. It's like a separate set of rules where you can play like this. It's very cool. And then there's also some kind of creatures that go with it as well.
I can't think of a better mashup though. Ogre Cthulhu, like that's insane.
It's a good combo. It's a good combo. No, I mean, again, I think as we've touched on earlier, like the Cthulhu doing a potted history of Cthulhu is very tricky. It is probably a series in itself to go through everything and look at all the details. And there are plenty of podcasts out there that are exclusively Cthulhu related or Cthulhu game related. I think one of the things that we've really drawn out of this though is that like, in the stories of Cthulhu and in the types of messages that come out of it, there is that ability to just take it your own direction, but you've also got the core building foundation, the foundation blocks that you need to make a good story, because it's mysterious, it's weird, you could go mad, there's this ultimate power that you don't know about, and you're taking it off in these wacky directions. Even things like the cutesy Cthulhu versus Tesla bullet shooter game is drawing on that and making it something else.
People riff off that, but I think at the core existential horror that Lovecraft tapped into is this idea that far from us being the masters of the universe, the most important species, the central point, which many previous ideologies and religions put humans at the heart of it all. His horror was you're not at the heart of it. You're actually a really minor bit player. Yeah. In fact, you're insignificant. These titanic energies of these great beings that we call gods because they're so big and unknowable, we just can't quantify them. But they are essentially aliens. It's really science fiction. Yeah. That we're nothing to them, no more than ants. We care about an ant that we might tread on.
Yeah.
And that was the kind of horror that he got across. And in a way, I think even the Cthulhu plushies, maybe people aren't consciously aware of what they're doing, but it's an attempt to engage with the horror of our own mortality.
Yeah.
And that's the horror it faces you with.
I've never been able to explain my tattoo better to anyone. Well, basically, it's a mirror into your soul.
I think it does. Like that like the mortality of us as individuals and the mortality of us as species, because the fate of all species is to live. Who live is to die. No species is immutable. No species lasts forever. We might still be something of us in other things, but eventually we move on. And Lovecraft touches on a lot of this stuff with the way he, something like the Shoggoths, for example, which are in Acton Cthulhu Tactics. These kind of protoplasmic beings that were used as a slave race, but that rose up to try and overthrow people. They have this kind of this raw idea of horror is that actually human beings were just a kind of side offshoot of the project to make people to get biscuits down from a high shelf, with big tentacles or something like that. It's again, it just makes us not special. And I think that is, when you consider big issues that humanity faces, I think it's nice to remember that we don't control anything, far from it, and that's why working together is a better thing than not.
Yeah.
which is a positive take on the existential dread of Lovecraftian horror.
Has there ever been anything highly romanticized? It's all very horror-centric. Has there ever been some novel, a game, or even a film maybe that's more like romanticized with Cthulhu as a centric being within that?
When you say romanticized, you're not talking about a dating simulator.
I don't think we or Auroch is so ready for that yet.
I think that
but just something like, I mean, that seems like an interesting. We're talking about setting just now, like where I would love to see it go there. Could it go there?
Like, I suppose Cthulhu Saves the World is the closest. The closest of the ones I've played to making Cthulhu trying to understand Cthulhu's point of view. But actually, there is a Neil Gaiman. I think it's a Neil Gaiman short story called I, Cthulhu, where he tells the thing from Cthulhu's point of view,
right?
Which is obviously not our point of view. Maybe that's as close.
See, all of a sudden, I'm much more drawn to that kind of sympathetic approach.
It's free online. I think you can just Google.
But also, to be sympathetic towards Cthulhu because he's not a nice, not a nice thing.
Until you know where he's come from.
Yes, that's very true. Yeah. No, I still think he's probably a little bit of a B word, but. Tom, thank you very much again. Really appreciate you coming in. So appreciate it, and we'll speak to you on the next episode. So I kind of feel like I need a beer or a cider or something to ease the existential dread I'm feeling about my place in the grand universe.
I mean, just looking back at the content of season 4, we've gone into space, gone to Mars,
gone underwater,
we've been to a whole lot of places, and it's weird that that's
the final one is our soul.
That seems to be the theme, right? And you're doing something very, very similar. You're kind of firing yourself off into another dimension, it seems.
A whole new
and
whole new world.
You will be missed, man.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Matthew Walker. I know I'm gonna miss these chats. I'm gonna miss this together. But let's
not kid ourselves. These aren't chats. It's just you talking at me whilst I hit record and watch levels
and nodding. That's very important in a conversation with me. I think though, no, honestly, I'm very excited to see what's going to happen with this podcast in the future. I'm sure the next marketing community person will take over this hot seat well and lead this forward in the right direction. But keep following all the Auroch Digital stuff. We're all over on these different places, so you can go off and see us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. You can follow us on LinkedIn if you want to.
Wow.
It's more businessy stuff on
no
there.
one includes that in a course like
right. We're on YouTube. You can find us on Mixer, on Twitch. You can find all over the place. So there's a whole range of different places you can meet us and catch up with us. So I suppose there's not really much else to do except for to say goodbye.
I mean, I didn't
Bye.
Really... when it's gone. I didn't even think about maybe prepping something to say really for this moment. This is quite a big moment.
Bye.
Laters. No, I mean, I'll take the opportunity.
Yeah, okay.
I'll take the opportunity. Yeah. You've been a real energy.
Thank you.
Since joining Auroch Digital, and you've been a real buzz around the office, both good and bad. And I'll never, not bad, but I'll never forget this little note you put up on this wall. If you can hear that.
Yeah.
The space marketing monkey or something.
Yeah.
That was one of the first things I saw, and I asked someone, "Who did that?" And they said it was Matt, and I was like, right. That's who Matt is. That's the sort of thing that he does. That's
the thing that I'll slap on a door and be like, this is how we do things together. No, thank you very much, Matt. I really do appreciate that. I think that's a very, very, very nice thing for you to say. So till next time. Bye.